what if the Fatui Harbingers ranks don't actually tell us who is the strongest, but instead when they will be used? What if their numbers represent a sequence, a carefully scripted order in the Tsaritsa's master plan? Not a military hierarchy, but something far more ritualistic. Roles, sacrifices, and stages in a divine play that's been centuries in the making. Now, before you call this pure headcanon, hear me out, alright? The Harbingers have always felt different from a normal organization. Their Commedia dell'Arte names, their opera-style trailers, Pierro's prophetic speeches, and that chilling line from Winter Night's Lazzo.
Because on this chessboard, checkmate is not where the game ends.
Makes you think. I'm Princess Farron, and in this video, we're exploring whether the Harbingers' ranks might reflect their purpose in the Tsaritsa's endgame rather than raw power. This is just a theory, but it connects a surprising number of dots across Natlan, Khaenri'ah, the Abyss, and beyond. Ready? Let's go. First of all, shall we define what is a Harbinger? It means A. Someone or something that foreshadows a future event. B. One that initiates a major change. C. A pioneer. Or D. A person sent ahead to provide lodgings. Now, I find this one particularly curious because some of the Harbingers are somewhat like vessels, like lodgings. Capitano, for the souls. Scaramouche, whose core was used by Sandrone to calculate the world formula. Sandrone herself was created in the image of Marianne Guillotin. In the future, however, maybe other Harbingers will also become vessels. But more on that later on. The 11 Fatui Harbingers are the executive heads of the Fatui, who serve the Tsaritsa, the Cryan Archon of Shinisnaya. They possess powerful delusions, vision-like objects that supposedly utilize the remains of deceased gods, and they are on the hunt for the Seven Noses while being allowed to pursue their own goals. They have 11 members, each holding enormous influence regardless of how you look at it. Now, could their hierarchy be based on seniority or the order they joined? No. Because, for example, La Signora was recruited before Scaramouche, but her rank is the 8th, while Scaramouche is the 6th, and Arlecchino most likely joined before Tartaglia, but she's got number 4, occupying the title and the position of her predecessor, Sabina. How about their power and strengths? Childe is the 11th, but he awakened and kept the all-devouring narwhal at bay through several days of fighting to save the people of Fontaine. Columbina is a moon goddess, but still has a lower rank than both Capitano and Dottore. I mean, we know how crazy and intelligent Dottore was, or is, but still, he was the one who tried to harness the power of the moon. If he lacked that power, he shouldn't be above the very source of said power, right? Arlecchino openly defies other members of the Harbingers, yet retains her title. She became a Harbinger by assassinating the previous knave and acted against the Fatui's original plans to obtain the Hydrognosis. Instead of using force, she helped save Fontaine and managed to acquire the Gnosis through peaceful negotiation with Neuvillette. So, if seniority and power don't define their rank, what does? And if the order was completely random, why would it still be featured in all the Fatui Harbingers titles? If the Harbinger numbers aren't measuring power, then maybe they're measuring purpose. Not who is strongest, but who acts when. Let's think together. If the Tsaritsa only cared about military efficiency, several Harbingers would be liabilities. Dottore conducts bizarre personal experiments, Arlecchino openly disagrees with other Harbingers, Scaramouche was notoriously difficult to control, Columbina appeared detached from Fatui affairs, Childe creates chaos wherever he goes. Yet, they keep their position. And why is that? Because their personal ambitions are irrelevant as long as they eventually fulfill their designated role. I believe this inconsistency suggests there is an alternate organizing principle, the order in which they'll fulfill their roles or even sacrifice themselves to achieve the Tsaritsa's master plan. While the Harbingers are powerful, like Nahida said, the top-ranked Harbingers possess power comparable to gods. She might have been looking at the effect, not the cause. They don't have the rank because they are strong. They were given the power necessary to fulfill the rank's purpose. Because the Fatui aren't just a military organization. They're agents in a divine plan. The Fatui are theatrical, ritualistic, symbolic, almost liturgic. Their names, as we all know, come from Commedia dell'Arte, an Italian form of improv street theater around the 16th and 18th centuries. And so, it makes sense that their trailers are staged like operas. Pierro speaks like a prophet, Tsaritsa's rebellion has apocalyptic undertones, and her endgame, unifying or opposing the other gods to defy Celestia, or recreating or even reviving the third descender, would logically require each Harbinger to enact a stage. From war to deception to sacrifice to rebirth. Every Harbinger may be a designated actor waiting for their cue. Curious to see how the play will unfold? Then let me accompany you to your seat. The director. Let's start off with the one that is actually out of that hierarchy. The Fatui Harbinger's director, Pierro, the Jester, who marks the beginning of the rebellion. He was the first person to ever become a Harbinger. Pierro is from Khaenri'ah, and when the cataclysm occurred, he was among the pure-blooded Khaenri'ahns cursed with immortality. That's why he got enraged by the principles of this world and joined the Tsaritsa's cause, recruiting several of the other Fatui Harbingers like La Signora. In A Winter Night's Lazo, he says,
In this war, not even a single pawn may be spared. Because on this chessboard, checkmate is not where the game ends.
I believe this implies that even the Harbingers are not safe from being used. Quite the contrary, I dare say. And perhaps even death won't mean their defeat in terms of achieving their ultimate goal. He's like the stage director, making sure the Harbinger's play will proceed according to plan. Besides his prowess, Il Capitano's loyalty to his fellow Khaenri'ahns and his sense of justice make him the perfect Harbinger to set the first scene of the Tsaritsa play. In ritualistic terms, the captain shares symbolic resonance with the first act of a divine ritual. Someone, in this case a soldier, who moves without self, as an offering to appease and respect the forces being petitioned. Being a pure-blooded Khaenri'ahn, Capitano was cursed with immortality, and that's why he was able to merge himself with the Lord of the Night in Mahuika's stead, thus preventing their deaths. But his offering, his sacrifice, began prior to that. His heart was altered to act as a vessel for souls, absorbing hundreds of his fallen comrades along with Natlanese warriors. Throughout his centuries of wandering, he carried them in hopes of finding a way to release them to the ley lines and grant them eternal peace. And all that time, their voices endlessly echoed and wailed inside his mind, preventing him from even falling asleep. And I don't know if you've noticed, but very fittingly, Capitano's constellation consists of 3 crossed nails, mirroring the crucifixion of Jesus Christ, who was crucified with his hands and feet nailed to the cross by 3 nails. Another symbol that associates Capitano with sacrifice, redemption, and profound love. Thrain being Harbinger number 1 makes even more sense if we also consider the symbolism associated with it. Biblically, the number centers on the unity and primacy of the one God. In many traditions, the number 1 represents a new beginning or a single driving force, which is perfect for the man leading the charge. We know that Capitano wears that mask to hide away his state of decay. However, his facelessness also emphasizes his role as a sort of vessel of loyalty for the common good, an embodiment of war without self. Second of the Fatui Harbingers, Zandik, the Doctor, Il Dottore. If Capitano is the offering, Dottore is unmistakably the creator, the one building the machinery of the Tsaritsa's grand design. His entire existence is defined by breaking the rules of Tevat. He created multiple independent segments of himself, turned Scaramouche into a vessel for a false godhood, and has pursued forbidden knowledge without hesitation. As we saw in the recent Truce Amongst the Pages of Purana Archon Quest, his ambitions reached even further, attempting to reshape or create a new world tied to Irminsul itself. This strive to mock the gods' authority over life, death, and reality makes him the perfect architect for the Tsaritsa's ritual. In biblical symbolism, the number 2 represents division, duality, and the need for witnesses or confirmation. Dottore literally divided himself into segments and constantly seeks to prove humanity can surpass divine limits. He may not be a vessel in the same way as others. Instead, he is the one creating vessels and testing the boundaries of what is possible. His experiments, no matter how unhinged, serve the larger sequence by pushing the limits of what the Tsaritsas can ultimately achieve. Even his cryptic comment about a suspiciously vacant seat gains new weight now. While it clearly referenced Scaramouche at the time, it also plants the idea that certain roles in the plan remain unfulfilled, waiting for the right moment. Dottore doesn't just serve the Tsaritsa, he actively forges the tools she needs to defy destiny. And remember that suspiciously vacant seat, because we'll come back to it later. One of the most fascinating harbingers, at least for me, is the third, Columbina, the Damselette. The story has taken on an almost mythical scale. Originally tied to the Frost Moon, Columbina has now become the Tri-Lune goddess, having received the full authorities of all 3 Moon Sisters, Arya, Sonnet, and Canon. In the recent events surrounding Nokrai and the Song of the Welcome Moon questline, the fallen Moon Sisters transferred their lunar powers to her, allowing Columbina to unify the fragmented authorities into one being. This is huge. But despite her immense divine power as a Tri-Lune goddess, she only holds the rank of 3rd. This fact may support the idea that Harbinger numbers aren't strictly about raw strengths. If they were, a being who now wields the combined power of 3 ancient moon goddesses would arguably sit much higher. In the context of the Tsaritsa's plan, Columbina's position as number 3 feels perfectly placed. Biblically and spiritually, 3 represents divine completeness. It's the union of body, mind, and spirit, and the Holy Trinity. In alchemy, it corresponds to the Tria Prima, sulfur, which is the soul, mercury, representing the spirit, and salt, the body, the 3 essentials needed for transformation. And Columbina embodies this union. She has become the living vessel for 3 fragmented lunar authorities. Her seraphic design, hidden eyes, and gentle yet terrifying presence give her an angelic, otherworldly quality that bridges the mortal harbingers and the divine. What's even more compelling is that she appears to have made a special deal with the Tsaritsa long ago. She wasn't simply recruited like some of the others. She feels more like a key piece that the Tsaritsa was waiting for. Her personal journey of reclaiming and unifying the Moon Sisters' power may have always been part of that larger ritual. And as a little tangent, that could also be the reason why the Harbingers are allowed to follow their own pursuits. It would make sense none of that matters to the Tsaritsa as long as each member shows up on the stage at the appropriate time to fulfill their role. As the third step in the sequence, Columbina represents the moment the plan moves from the physical and intellectual, Capitano and Dottore, into the truly divine. She is the soul and spiritual anchor of the operation, the point where mortal ambition begins to touch celestial power. Her acceptance of the three authorities through the sacrifice of the Moon Sisters further reinforces the theme. In the Tsaritsa's play, offerings and vessels are extremely relevant. If Columbina represents the soul of the operation, then the next step can be another divine figure. The Tsaritsa would need something more practical, a bloodline capable of carrying that legacy forward. Enter Arlecchino, the knave, fourth of the Fatui Harbingers. As a descendant of the Crimson Moon dynasty, Arlecchino carries the Pale Moon bloodfire in her veins. This cursed power grants her immense strength while slowly consuming her from within. Her blood can erase memories and even bridge two worlds, as described in the lore of her signature weapon, Crimson Moon Semblance. The House of the Huss she oversees also echoes the ancient Conrian orphanage once built for descenders, making her both a guardian and a vessel of forbidden legacy. What makes her position as number 4 especially compelling is how little her rank seems to depend on her obedience or raw destructive power. Arlecchino openly defies other harbingers. She assassinated the previous knave to claim her title, and during the Fontaine crisis, she completely went against the Fatui's original plan. Notice that Arlecchino inherited not just the title, knave, but the force seat itself. That may imply the role matters more than the individual who fulfills it. And that's important. Arlecchino didn't just inherit a codename. She inherited a number, a role, a place in the sequence. Instead of seizing the Idor Noses by force, she chose to negotiate with Neuvillette and even help save the nation. Despite these acts of independence, she retains her seat without issue. This could be strong evidence for our theory. If the Tsaritsa only cared about loyalty or military hierarchy, Arlecchino would be a liability. Instead, her actions suggest she is fulfilling a designated role, that of the lineage, perhaps, the one who carries Conrian blood memory and builds the next generation agents. Symbolically, the number 4 often represents stability, foundation, and the material world, the 4 elements, 4 directions, and the 4 corners of the earth. In the Tsaritsa sequence, Arlecchino may serve as the stabilizing bridge between the early sacrificial and creative stages and the more divine ones that follow. She preserves bloodline, memory, and hidden knowledge while preparing children who can serve as future vessels or agents. She is not just another soldier, she could be a keeper of the lineage, ensuring that even if certain harbingers fall or are sacrificed, the blood and purpose of Conria continue flowing into the Tsaritsa's endgame. Let's pause for a bit. So far, we've seen an offering, a creator, a divine vessel, a keeper of lineage. These aren't random military specialties, they're stages. Fifth of the Fatui Harbingers, Pulcinella, the Rooster, mayor of Chesnaya. At first glance, Pulcinella seems like the odd one out. No divine bloodline or larger-than-life powers, which raises an interesting question. If the Harbinger Order is really a ritual sequence, why would someone like Pulcinella sit right in the middle of it, right? While he may not have the flashy combat presence of some of the others, Pulcinella's role could be one of the most essential in the entire sequence, the foundation. He is deeply embedded in the day-to-day governance and stability of Chesnaya. As mayor, he maintains order at home while the other Harbingers operate abroad. He keeps a close eye on Tartaglia's family with a not-so-subtle undertone of leverage, and he works alongside Pierro and Pantalone on Project Stucha, whatever grand undertaking that may be. In the Tsaritsa's ritualistic plan, the number 5 carries interesting weight. Biblically and symbolically, 5 often represents grace, balance, and the human element, the bridge between the divine, numbers 1 to 4, and the later stages of completion. It can also symbolize preparation and the gathering of resources before the heavier spiritual and sacrificial phases begin. Pulcinella feels like the stabilizing force that ensures the stage itself remains standing. He may not be a vessel in the same dramatic way as Capitano or Sandrone, but he acts as a vessel for control and continuity. He's the one making sure Sneznaya's internal power structure and resources stay intact while the larger ritual unfolds. And his long, pointed ears and somewhat otherworldly appearance have led to speculation that it could be a long-lived elf, fae, or otherwise non-human entity, which would further explain why Tsaritsa trusts him with such a foundational role. He is the quiet anchor that allows the more chaotic and divine pieces, Dottore, Columbina, to operate freely. Without a solid foundation, even the most elaborate play collapses. In that sense, Pulcinella may be far more important to the Tsaritsa's endgame than his relatively low ranking suggests. Before erasing his traces from Irminsul, the Balladeer Scaramouche was the 6th of the Fatui Harbingers. And since being created by A, for the longest part of his existence, he was used as a mere puppet to serve others' goals. And if we take into account the religious meaning of that number, his initial story arc makes even more sense. Why do I say this? Well, the number 6 is associated with human beings and human weaknesses, the devil, and the manifestation of sin, because man was created on the 6th day of creation week, and a Hebrew slave had to serve 6 years before he could be released in the 7th year. A created him from a branch of a missile tree left behind by the Conmians. However, she deemed her creation a failure because he shed tears while sleeping, and that made her believe that he was just too fragile. That's why she eventually created the Shogun. Eventually, Pierro found him and persuaded him to join the Fatui and take his place at the banquet against the divine. An idea that definitely tempted Scaramouche because he felt deeply betrayed and abandoned by both humans and Archons. In Chapter 3, Scaramouche is in the process of becoming Shuki no Kami, an artificial god, with the assistance of Dottore. Following his defeat by the Travel and Nahida, and after learning the truth about Dottore's interference in his past, he erases the memory of his existence from Irminsul. As we can see, until the point that Nahida saved him, because that's what she actually did, Scaramouche had spent his whole life as a discarded vessel of a god that was later used as a vessel to create a new artificial god. He was simply just a commodity being constantly used. A adapted lost Conrian biomechanical and alchemical techniques to construct both Scaramouche and the Raiden Shogun, most likely based on the process Raiden's daughter used to develop her creations like the Reef Hounds. And that's why Scaramouche was tasked to make several incursions in the Abyss while working for the Tsaritsa, because he can resist the abyssal corruption. And that may be precisely why the Tsaritsa wanted him in the Harbinger's ranks. As a 6th step, he could represent the proof that the sequence can fail or change, that there's room for adaptability, to improvise, or maybe not. Perhaps the Tsaritsa was counting on Scaramouche to erase himself from Irminsul and to save the Traveler from Dottore, because those facts will allow the next scenes to come to fruition. But this bit right here is speculation and just a hunch I have. Anyway, besides this, I'd like to leave here the idea that Scaramouche's role in the Harbingers could also serve as a bit of foreshadowing for what will happen later in the Tsaritsa's play, but we'll get to that soon enough. And right after the discarded vessel comes another puppet, the 7th Harbinger, Sandrone, the Marionette. Created by Alain Guillotin in the perfect image of his deceased younger sister, Marianne, Sandrone is literally a mechanical vessel. More than replacing a lost loved one, she was built as an homage, yet she developed her own consciousness and personality. That very act of creation already feels loaded with meaning. In biblical and spiritual traditions, the number 7 is one of the most powerful. It represents completion, perfection, and a spiritual awakening. God created the world in 6 days and rested on the seventh. 7 is tied to wholeness, the fulfillment of a cycle, and the birth of something new. This fits Sandrone's existence almost eerily well. For the longest time, she lacked only one thing: the original memories. Yet it was that very absence that allowed her to become her own person rather than a mere copy. And in the events of version 6.3, Sandrone took this theme of completion even further. She sacrificed her current body, tricked Dottore, and played a key role in completing the world formula, an act that ultimately helped save Columbina. Even in apparent defeat, she advanced the larger plan. I don't know if you agree, but this feels like another deliberate stage in the Tsaritsa's ritual. A being born as an artificial vessel achieves a form of perfection through self-sacrifice and consciousness transfer. If Sandrone has already prepared a new or improved vessel for herself, then her death was simply another transition. The Marionette didn't just entertain the Tsaritsa's court. She may have fulfilled one of the most critical steps, proving that consciousness and memory can successfully move between vessels, bringing the ritual closer to completion. 7 isn't the end. It's the point where everything becomes whole, ready for the final acts that follow. And again, we're talking about vessels. Capitano became a vessel for souls. Scaramouche was created as a vessel for a god. Sandrone became a vessel for memory and consciousness. Signora may have become a vessel for a living flame. At this point, I think it stops feeling like coincidence and it starts looking like preparation. 8 of the Fatui Harbingers, La Signora, the Crimson Witch of Flames. Rosalind's story is one of the most tragic in Genshin lore. After losing her beloved Rostam in the Cataclysm, she turned her overwhelming grief into liquid fire, becoming the Crimson Witch and later joining the Fatui as Signora. She met a dramatic end in Inazuma, but her role in the Tsaritsa's plan may be far from over. In this ritualistic play sequence, the 8th fit appears to represent purification, the burning away of the old to make way for the new. Biblically and spiritually, the number 8 is deeply tied to resurrection, renewal, and new beginnings. It follows the completion of 7, symbolizing a transformation into something greater. What keeps this idea powerful is the possibility that Signora's flame never truly disappeared. When the Raiden shoguns choke her down, she didn't just kill Rosalind, she may have simply broken the vessel. Signora had already abandoned her mortal body long ago, transforming her life force into liquid fire through ancient arts. That essence, that purifying flame born from grief and rage, could very well have returned to the Tsaritsa. Supporting this are the visuals from A Winter Night's Lasso. We see Signora's chest piece fall, only for a hellfire butterfly to land gently upon it. Later, the same butterfly appears near her coffin. Combined with Pierro's words, "On this chessboard, checkmate is not where the game ends," I think it strongly suggests her story isn't finished. The Tsaritsa may have collected that eternal flame, storing it like a sacred offering, waiting for the exact moment it's needed in her ritual. If this theory holds, Signora's death was never a loss. It was a delivery of a critical component, a purifying fire powerful enough to cleanse the old world and pave the way for the new order that Tsaritsa intends to create. This would perfectly fit the pattern we've been seeing: harbingers as vessels and offerings. their value extending far beyond their physical lives. Signora may have yet one final influential role to play when the flames are finally unleashed. And if Signora represents purification, then the next stage isn't rebirth, it's preparation, because before a new world can be born, someone has to build it. Enter the ninth Harbinger, the Regrator, Pantalone. On the surface, his role seems the most straightforward. Money. As one of the richest men in Tevat, Pantalone provides the massive financial backbone that keeps the entire Fatui operation running. He's the one who can casually pay for indefinite use of the Goth Grand Hotel in Mondstadt and fund projects on a national or even international scale. But in the context of the Tsaritsa's larger plan, his position as the ninth may go far beyond simple accounting. If the Harbingers represent stages in a ritual, then Pantalone could embody the material foundation, the body or the tangible resources needed to bring the plan into reality. He supplies the wealth that turns vision into action. What makes this placement near the end of the sequence especially interesting is his own precarious situation. We learned in the truth amongst the pages of Piranha Archon Quest that he's only alive thanks to Dottore's experimental procedures. With Dottore supposedly gone, Pantalone's supply of life-extending elixir is running out. His time is literally limited. That sense of approaching finality fits the number 9 surprisingly well. In many traditions, 9 symbolizes the completion of a cycle and the last moments before a major transition. Pantalone's background adds another layer. Born into poverty and overlooked by the gods because he never received a vision, for example, he slowly made his way to the top through sheer intellect and ambition. Now he channels that resentment into funding what may become the means to overthrow the divine order itself. His personal drive and the Fatui's need for resources align almost too perfectly. Together with Pierro and Pulcinella in Project Stusa, he's helping lay the practical groundwork for whatever the Tsaritsa intends to build. In a ritual sense, he may represent the point where all the accumulated preparations, powers, souls, divine fragments, and now material wealth converge right before the final act. More than an afterthought, the ninth seat feels like the necessary step that says everything is in place. We've talked about sacrifices, vessels, completion. But there's still one problem. The sequence has a gap. Now we come to what is probably the most intriguing seat of all, the 10th Harbinger. Unlike the others, this position is conspicuously vacant. We don't know who originally held it, whether it was ever filled, or why it remains empty even after Signora's and Dottore's deaths, Capitano's merging with the Lord of the Night, and Scaramouche's defection. The Fatui still recognize 11 seats, yet one sits deliberately unfilled. That alone makes the 10th feel important. In an organization as calculated as the Fatui, nothing this visible stays empty by accident. Number 10 traditionally symbolizes completion. The end of one cycle and the threshold to the next. It's the point before everything culminates, often before a major transformation or rebirth. If the Harbinger's ranks really represent stages in the Tsaritsa's plan, then the 10th seat may mark the moment all previous pieces come together, right before the final act. During the summary events, Dottore mentions a suspiciously vacant seat and someone tampering with the records. Most of us assumed he was only talking about Scaramouche, but given how quickly Dottore realized the truth about the Balladeer, it's possible he was also, or instead, referring to the still empty 10th position. Honestly, that's the first thing I thought. So, what could it mean? Perhaps the rule is waiting for the right person or the right moment. It could be reserved for a future harbinger we haven't met yet. It might even be symbolic, a deliberate gap in the ritual that only an outsider, a descender, or a world-altering event can fill. One of the more speculative ideas floating around is that the traveler themselves could end up connected to the seat. After all, they've been deeply involved in the affairs of every nation and earned names and titles in several of them. And even the Harbingers have shown unusual interest in them. Dottore once tried to recruit the traveler directly. So why not have them getting the title of the 10th Fatui Harbinger? But this is just food for thought. But whether that theory actually plays out or not, the vacancy itself feels like a narrative flag. Something critical is still missing from the Tsaritsa's board. That empty seat may be the literal gap in her ritual, the pause before the final convergence. It suggests the play cannot reach its true ending until this position is fulfilled, or perhaps until the noses themselves complete the greater purpose they were always meant to serve. Whatever fills the 10th seat, whatever it represents, this scene may very well be the turning point, the moment that Tsaritsa's long game shifts from preparation to execution. And with every new region we visit, that moment feels closer and closer. We can't forget about the conclusion of Project Stuja. Get ready, everyone, because...
But winter is coming.
Now that everything is set for the final piece to take the stage, it's time to talk about the 11th of the 11 Fatui Harbingers, Tartaglia, Childe. Is he the weakest of the Harbingers? I really don't think so. I believe Ajax, or Ajax, sets up the 11th step, the bridge between the mortal world and the abyss that triggers the finale of the play. After all, he's a fighting, hungry one. And that is why the 11th exists. If the 10 is the completion and law, 11 is the chaos that breaks it. Because the 10th is missing, or it may be filled by an external force, Childe, the 11th, may be the one who triggers the instability needed to actually end the old world so that a new one can emerge. And here the number itself also provides us with some more meaningful symbolism. 11 equals disorder, final threshold before transition. 11 is a master number, which means it's a number that is not reduced to a single digit. It represents a powerful bridge between the conscious and subconscious realms. It encompasses the duality of light and shadow, combining the drive of the number 1 with the supreme empathy of the 2. And Ajax, as I've mentioned on my Why Tartaglia's Vision Failed video, is someone defined by duality. From being a ruthless and somewhat reckless fighter to being a loyal friend and a loving brother. He wielded a hydrovision and an electro-delusion, and in fact, he's pretty much a vessel for the abyss through his foul legacy form. And here we have, once again, the concept of being a vessel, just like other members of the Fatui Harbingers. Coincidence? Maybe. But I really don't think so, because vessels are present throughout Teyvat's history. We've already mentioned A. After leaving Scaramouche unfit for the role, she created by the Shogun, an extremely advanced puppet to act as Inazuma's ruler, and her body double even getting involved in fights. All the while, A's consciousness resided inside the meditative plane of Euthymia. Another example is Ajdeha. When Ajdeha began deteriorating from erosion, he manifested fragments of his consciousness into mortal vessels. Ju, representing his hatred towards humanity in Morax, and Kunjun, representing his benevolence and promise to defend Liyue. And of course, we can also mention something similar is in place when we talk about Zhongli's or Zibai's 3 deadly cells. So I mentioned these to express that, as the last scene of the play, Ajax may very well play the role of the vessel. Even if he will not permanently hold the 7 noses that make up the third descender, his body may play an important part, especially because he can be considered a mix between human, heroic, and monstrous, the bridge between mortal and divine realms. A human whose name involves a legacy of heroism, who's been forged since he was very young to become a fighting machine with some resistance to abyssal energy. The Tsaritsa's orders were for the Harbinger to get a hold of the noses from the beginning of the game. So it's only logical that her plan involves joining them together in a vessel that will allow the third descender to be recreated. Or if not the actual third descender, at least their power. According to Skirk, Tartaglia awakened it, the all-devouring narwhal's power. And while training with Skirk in the Abyss, he still resisted, despite still being a 14-year-old. Abyssal connection and instability. He's the only Harbinger we know who willingly loses control. Childe's signature foul legacy transformation is the power he acquired in the Abyss. Because it drains his vitality and is inherently unstable, he deliberately lets go of his humanity and restraint to access it. Biblically, 11 can symbolize chaos and judgment. Coming after 10, which symbolizes law and responsibility, 11 represents the opposite, which is the irresponsibility of breaking the law, which brings disorder and judgment. Spiritually, its energy is tied to intuition, enlightenment, and spiritual awakening. Moreover, 11 calls individuals to embrace their life purpose and inspire others through their actions. And that definitely reflects the way Tartaglia kept fighting even when his vision stopped working. Tartaglia, literally being the last numbered Harbinger, would align with this final act. He could become the final vessel through which the Tsaritsa's plan could be completed, whether merging the Abyss and Celestia or creating a new divine order. And of course, we can't forget that the Fatui Harbingers are named after the Commedia dell'Arte. Their names are literally theater roles. In a play, the order of characters isn't defined by their strengths, but by when they enter the stage and the actions they enact. Tartaglia entering last fits the final act perfectly, if he turns out to be the vessel for awakening or encompassing the power of the third descender. So, after going through all 11 seats or scenes, here's what I believe. The Harbingers were never meant to be just an elite military force. They are actors in an elaborate ritualistic play, hence the title borrowed from Commedia dell'Arte, each with a designated role and a moment to step onto the stage. Their personal ambitions, their madness, even their defiance, all of it seems tolerated because in the end, they'll fulfill the part that Tsaritsa needs. Of course, this is still speculation, so don't come after me. I simply enjoy thinking, trying to connect the dots, and exploring possibilities. That's what a theory is. It doesn't mean it's true. It's a way of thinking about the events that took place in the game, the lore, and extracting possibilities that may actually come true or not. It's an exercise of the brain and intuition. Anyway, the game has repeatedly shown that top Harbingers possess godlike power, and strengths clearly matters. But the inconsistencies in the ranking, Arlecchino's independence, Dottore's chaos, Columbina's detachment, and the vacant 10th seat suggest there's a deeper organizing principle at work, one that goes beyond simple power scaling. Pierro himself told us,
In this war, not even a single pawn may be spared. Because on this chessboard, checkmate is not where the game ends.
whether through sacrifice, transformation, or becoming vessels, the Harbingers may be the ingredients for something much larger, possibly the revival or recreation of the Descender, the unification of the Noses, or the final rebellion against Celestia. The Tsaritsa lost her love for this world long ago. Dayleaf says so. She's playing a long game. One where even her most powerful pieces might be expendable if it means breaking the shackles of fate. And if you ask me why the Tsaritsa would know or at least have an idea of what she needs to do to defy fate, then I can mention that I believe that Tevat has been through a samsara for a very long time. And that's also one of the reasons she wants to break the ongoing program. But since that would be a whole other theory, I'll leave it at that. So tell me in the comments, do you think the Harbinger rank represents order and purpose? Or is it still mostly about strengths? Could some of them be destined to become sacrifices or vessels? And who or what do you think will eventually fill the 10th seat? And if you enjoyed this deep dive, drop a like, subscribe, and let me know what other Fatui Oceanian theory you're most curious about. Winter is coming, and I can't wait to see how this play ends. Thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed this one, check out these videos too. This is Princess Farron signing out. Take care and good gaming. Bye bye.